Hi, this is Professor Clint Lanier, Professor of Rhetoric and Professional Communication, and I'm going to talk today about document design, various document design principles and guidelines to help you better design a document and understand how to make information easier for the reader to find, use, and, uh, and understand. Let's start out talking about design principles and documents. All documents have specific design requirements. I've talked in other lectures about genres. Every document, just about every document, professional documents, fall into some type of genre. What I mean by genre is a group of documents that share some type of similarities. So for example, memos all kind of look alike. You know what a memo looks like. It might say memo on the very top. It'll have a to, from, a subject, and a date, and then go right into the content of whatever it is, or the subject, whatever it is. A newspaper looks like a newspaper. So these are genres. And so when I say that all documents have specific design requirements, if you know that you're designing a newspaper, you kind of understand what it's supposed to look like. And so it has specific design requirements that you can follow. Likewise, if you're designing a memo and you know you're going to write a memo, well, you know that it has specific design requirements that it needs to follow. Sometimes, though, within these requirements, there are a lot of decisions that need to be made on how to better design that document. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. And these are the decisions that you have to make. So the requirements of that document depend on the type of document you're creating. However, all documents should facilitate three purposes, and that's to make information easy to find, easy to understand, and easy to use. So these are the three things that no matter what type of document you're designing or what use it might be, now I'm talking again within a professional context, you want to make sure that the reader can easily find the information that they want. Once they get there, once they find that information, you also want to make sure that they can easily understand that information, and then finally easily use that information. Okay, these are the three requirements that all professional documents have to make. Now let me back up before I move on and let me talk about making information easy to find. There are a lot of design principles that are already in use, that you're already familiar with, that make information easy to find. So these are things that you're probably already familiar with. So for example, a table of contents. That's the whole purpose of a table of contents. That's a design principle. It's to make information easy to find. The same goes with an index. And as far as making information easy to understand, things like bulleted lists, it breaks information out so that we can easily have these small digestible pieces of information. It makes them easy to understand. And then easy to use, it depends on the use of context. It depends on what the user is going to, or the reader rather, is going to do with that information, how they're going to use it. Okay, so in any case, these are the three design requirements that pretty much all documents have. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to figure out what guidelines or what principles are there that we can follow that will help us achieve these three purposes. There are shared design principles. These I'm going to go kind of in depth into those three things I just talked about. So again, documents are designed to give easy access to information. They're easy to find. One way to test a document and figure out if that information is actually easy to find is find some content within the middle of a page of a document and then look away for a few seconds, maybe 10, 15 seconds. Look at something else. Go back to the document. If you can easily find the information that you were just looking at, well, then it was well designed, and you can and that kind of passes that test. Now imagine a set of instructions. This is why this is important. Imagine a set of instructions. Okay, when you are, say, installing software into a computer or whatever it happens to be, you might be reading the instructions. They're printed out and they're at your desk. So you read step 32. And then what do? Well, naturally you look away from that document and you perform step 32 on the computer or on the screen. And then you look back and you have to find step 33, or you have to find step 32 again. That's why it's important to quickly find information. Another aspect is the information that the reader wants or needs at that moment. Okay, think of a table of contents. A table of contents allows us to navigate some type of document, right? Whether it's a large book, say a design manual or something like that, or a reference manual, We can look at the table of contents, know that we're looking for whatever subject, find that subject in Chapter 5, find the page number for Chapter 5, and quickly flip to Chapter 5 and that page number. Page numbers themselves are an element of design meant to facilitate this purpose, right? We know that Chapter 5 and it starts on page 364, so we look at the bottom of a page because that's where page numbers are supposed to be until we find page 364. That's making information easy to find. Another example I have is a report, say a scientific report. Scientific reports are typically composed of some very specific sections. There is the introduction, the methods, the results, typically an analysis or discussion, and then finally the conclusion section, right? Every one of those sections is fronted by some type of title. Well, the reason it's broken up like that is so that people can find the information they're looking for. If I just want to look at the methodology you use in a scientific report so that I can recreate the methodology or I can check your methods, I don't want to have to read through the entire report until I find the section that you're talking about methods. These headers, these section headers allow me to flip directly to that method, or I'm sorry, to that method section, right? So that's making information very easy to find. A lot of different things help us do that, from tables of contents to page numbers to headers, to also the space around words themselves, the line spacing. All of these things help us quickly find information. Moving on, the next one is documents are designed to allow easy understanding of information. So how long does it take to comprehend the information? Now, this can be done by ensuring that your information isn't tied together in these really long, huge paragraphs, for example. The paragraph itself was designed to make information easier to understand, right? So essentially, every paragraph contains a subject or a topic unto itself, right? And that paragraph talks about the subject, and when we move on to a different paragraph, we know that we're kind of moving on to a different topic or a different subject. Well, the white space around the paragraph allows us to quickly find that paragraph and quickly understand what that information is saying. A lot of this part, how long does it take to comprehend the information, this part is also caught up in our audience analysis, right? We have to understand our readers and perhaps their technical expertise and so on and so forth so we can understand the actual language we use. But there are a lot of design elements we can use that help people understand information. And then finally, documents are designed to be used. Different readers will have different expectations about where to find information, so you must put the information where they expect it. Let's go back to what I said before about, say, a memo or a newspaper or even a report. People expect to find information in certain places when they are looking at a certain type of document. So a memo, I know that if you hand me a memo, I can look at the very top left corner and it should tell me who it was to, who it was from, what the subject is, what the date it was sent at, right? If you hand me a newspaper, I should be able to turn to different sections of the newspaper, excuse me, and quickly find that information. So I'm going to use this document somehow. And that's really one of the points that I've made in quite a few of these lectures, is that understand that professional communication is created for a purpose. It's made to be used. Okay? It's not made for entertainment. It's not made for our own pleasure. It's made so that we can somehow we can affect action somehow. All right? Somebody is going to use this document. So these are the three things we're trying to do at all times when we design documents. But these are three specific things that good document design can help us achieve. Making information easy to find, easy to understand, and finally, easy to use. Okay? So how do we do that? Let's get into some of these design principles to help better understand how to do these things. These are the main principles of document design. There's balance, alignment, grouping, consistency, and finally contrast. Now, as a side note, each of these is based on how we typically read in the West, and I am a professor in the United States, so this is kind of what I'm biasing. We read left to right and top to bottom, so when I am explaining these different principles, that's kind of what I'm referring to, and that's the I guess I said bias, and I guess that's the best way to put it. That's the bias that I'm using, that we are going to be reading from left to right and top to bottom. Okay, so let's get into these. Let's talk about balance first of all. Balance translates documents that look stable and even. It allows you to determine what information the reader should focus on. That's really important. This is something that you, as a designer of information or as a designer of a document, are able to do and that you should do. It should be a conscious decision on your part. Where do I want the reader to be focused when they open this page? Is it to the top right, the bottom left, the middle? These are things that you can achieve. You can actually determine where you want the reader to go through balance. Now, if you have a fully balanced page, then that means that the reader will not be distracted by any different part. The mistake that's made typically by amateur designers is that they have an unbalanced page. Unbalanced documents distract the reader and they don't allow them to easily focus on specific information. So if you have an unbalanced document, typically the reader's eye wanders off to that part where that you don't want them to be. Instead, you want them to be on a part, maybe the upper left-hand part, but because the lower right-hand part, something's going on there, it's just simply unbalanced, that's where their eye goes to. And when that happens, they don't see the information. Now, what if that information is extremely, extremely important information? What if it's a warning? What if it's information passed on, perhaps steps that they have to achieve before they can do anything else in a process? So you want to make sure that they go directly to that information and they're not distracted by some unbalanced portion of the document. So let's give you a couple of examples. The screen on the left, now that's kind of an old picture as you can see. That's what used to be called a PDA, a personal digital assistant, also a Palm Pilot. But that's a screen on a Palm Pilot that I would argue is fairly well balanced. Now, though there is more content on the top, there's more color on the top, the left and right on the top are balanced, but there's enough content on the bottom that your eye isn't really distracted. You kind of go from top to bottom and you can easily see information. This is a screen designed by professional graphic designers for a software, a handheld software system that I was involved in the design with. And I think it's very well balanced. Now the screen on the right is a storyboard for a video game that, again, I was involved in for the design, but not the design of the document. You can see your eye typically travels to the bottom of the document, and my eye travels to the bottom right of the document. Now, the problem is all the text in the story, the important part of the story, is above it, okay, because this is kind of a sales pitch, and you want the audience to be able to read that. It's awfully hard to read that, though, because your eye is drawn maybe to the anatomy chart there, or maybe to case, whatever that says, 4082. That's where my eye is drawn anyway. And so it's really tough to read that. So this is an unbalanced document. I think they could have achieved a better document by spreading that out a little bit so that you had an equal balance of text and images. I know perhaps what they're trying to achieve here, they're trying to demonstrate that what's going on in this particular video game. But what happens is the important information, the important text gets lost because of all of that, all of those graphics. So if what you wanted was the reader to just focus on the graphics, if that's all you wanted them to get, then this is fine. But if you want them to focus on the text, if the text is important to them, which in this case, in this particular document, it was important, then this document clearly fails because it's quite unbalanced. Had this document been perhaps a car brochure, if you've ever looked at a car brochure, it's usually heavy with images, less so with text. So you might see a page like this in a car brochure. But what they really want you to do is look at the vehicle. Text in a car brochure is secondary. So that's not as important to the designer as the images are, because they want to create this feeling in you by looking at this car rushing past it at great speeds or something like that. So in that case, this design would be perfect for a car brochure, but in the case of an important document, like a pitch document where you want them to focus on the text, I don't think it is balanced, and it really doesn't work. Whereas the one on the left, as a screen, I think it's very usable. I think it would appeal to most consumers because of the balance. One thing that you can do, as I've done here, is you can use grids to force you into a balanced design. So if you break the paper or the document out into quadrants and then look and see if any quadrant is heavier than the other quadrants insofar as the amount of content that's in that quadrant, then you can perhaps spread the information out somehow so that the quadrants aren't as as cluttered up, and you don't have an unbalanced document. And this is easy to do. This is easily achieved in Microsoft Word. You can overlay a grid on it on most photo editing or image manipulation software. You can do the same thing, overlay a grid, so that it'll help you kind of keep in balanced within the document itself. The next principle is alignment. Alignment allows you to do two things. Vertical alignment allows you to indicate levels of information, and horizontal alignment allows you to visually connect information. All right? So vertical alignment, again, if we're reading top to bottom, we typically think of things that are higher as perhaps being more important or being at the top level of something. All right? So, also speaking, horizontal alignment. So the further that it's moved to the left, it allows you to visually connect information somehow. All right? So those two principles of alignment are very, very important. So for example here, we have a page in a document, and this is a PDF document. On the left, we have the table of contents, or the bookmarks from the document. On the right, you have the content of the document itself. Now notice on the left, you have Chapter 1 at the top, followed below that by Overview. So we know that Overview fits into Chapter 1 because it's below it. But also, it's slid a little bit to the right. It's tabbed over to the right. So Overview is not only contained within Chapter 1, it's connected to Chapter 1, and Chapter 1 envelops that particular section. Now below that you have three other sections, subsections: product building, the data magic, and then needs that create whatever. Okay, so those three subsections of Overview, again, they're below Overview, and they're slid to the right a little bit more, so they're tabbed in. Then the following section title goes back to the left. Now we understand quickly that Overview and does not fit, or I'm sorry, Data Magic 2000, that next section, does not fit into Overview because it's at the same horizontal level as Overview is, despite the fact that it's vertically lower. So what this tells us a couple things. It tells us that Chapter 1 contains Overview and Data Magic and all the stuff that they contain. It also tells us that because Overview is above Data Magic, that Overview will somehow talk about Data Magic, but it doesn't contain Data Magic. So it's not going to give us a lot of details. But we're going to read Overview first because it's above Data Magic. Then the following section, Data Magic, is at the same level as Overview, but it's also below Chapter 1 and it's indented in. I hope that makes sense, that through this alignment process, our eyes see it and we automatically understand this hierarchy of information that's being created through alignment. Now similarly, if we look on the right-hand side where the content is, you have those bullet points. So in that second paragraph where it says this method of an incremental build, blah, 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 below that you have two bullet points. Now again, notice they're tabbed over. Now by aligning it to the right, we understand that those two bullet points somehow are connected to the paragraph above because they're below them, sure, but they're also slid to the right. They're tabbed over, and of course they're bulleted. So each of those two bullet points has something to do with the paragraph that is directly above it. Okay. Now here's something important to remember, and this goes for all of these principles: balance and alignment, and so on and so forth. When we look at a document, we immediately start gathering cues. It's metacognition, all right? It's before we read a word, before we really understand what is being said in the document, we start understanding how the document is connected. So all we know, without reading any of these words, we know all of this stuff. We know the hierarchy, okay? Because that's that meta information, this metacognition that's going on as soon as we look at a document. We don't even know that we're doing it, okay? It's totally subconscious of us. And it's great. It helps us understand information. It helps us kind of make sense of information as soon as we find it. So these are things that you'll want to think about as you design a document. How can I help readers quickly find information? And it's kind of through these mechanisms. Okay, so as you separate information into subtopics, make sure to indent the information to indicate that it's related to the above information. So in PowerPoint here, I wrote the word heading, and then I created a subheading, and PowerPoint automatically tabs it to the right. And then I created a subheading, and again, PowerPoint automatically tabs it to the right. So it's a convention, and this is expected of us. Remember, one of the things I said is that readers are expecting us to do certain things in a document. These are all things that they're expecting from us because they're conventions. They're part of the genres that we're using. On to the next one, grouping. Grouping ties similar information together, and it tells a reader that information has commonalities, topic, subject, whatever. You group like information, which creates a logical procession through the information. So in other words, things that are closer together, our eye automatically detects as somehow similar. Okay? Things that are far apart, our eye automatically understands is unrelated, okay, or is less similar to those things that are combined, right? So what we want to do is we want to make sure that information that is somehow related is closer together than information that is not related. How do we do that? Here's some quick examples through a business card. If we look at this particular business card, you'll notice that we have 4 groups of information. Okay, UCI, University of California. We know that the UCI stands for University of California because it's grouped together closely. Then we have a big space to the right, and we have name, and then we have graduate student, and then we have department or program. Now this is a business card template from UC Irvine. But we know, for example, that the graduate student, that whoever's name is there, is a graduate student. And we know that because those 2 items are close together. And then whatever department or program should be listed there, we'll understand that they are in that department or program because, again, that information is close together. Now, at the bottom left-hand side, we'll know that the phone number, fax number, email address, and message phone are all related. And then to the right, name of school, address, University of California, blah, blah, blah. So by grouping this information, we automatically understand the relationship between that information. Now, it's all on one business card, so we understand that all of this has to do with a particular thing, UC Irvine, and with that particular name of the graduate student. So grouping information is a great method of helping people quickly find and understand information, understand the relationships between information. Okay. Utilize text and white space when grouping information. Understand that less space between related information and more space between less common topics or unrelated information is really important, right? You can also use similar font size and types for similar information. That'll create a group in our mind. You know, if information is all capitalized, say we have 2 or 3 sentences all capitalized, we understand that that information and nothing around it else is capitalized. We understand that that information that's all capped is somehow related. Okay, so again, we create these relationships with information because they look the same and they're close together. The next one is consistency. Consistent elements throughout a document ensure that the reader feels comfortable and aware of their location in the document. It allows an information designer to signal changes in information. Okay? If you'll pick up pretty much any book on your bookcase and just start flipping through it, you'll notice what I mean by consistency. Okay? The page numbers, for example, are all in the same place throughout the document. They don't suddenly change. The font type, okay, that they use in that document is exactly the same for whatever content level you're at. So in other words, the headings will all share the exact same font type and font size and font color. They'll look the same throughout that book, whether you're on page 1 or page 200. They'll be exactly the same. So that's consistency. Imagine if you were reading a book and then suddenly everything changed midway through. Okay, you'd say, well, why are they doing this? Why is it somehow different? Am I reading the same book? Now, this happens a lot with websites. Websites is probably where you see this the most. So you're looking at a website and you select one of the links that's supposed to go to another page within that website. You get to that page, suddenly the design is completely different, and you have to look at the address bar and say, wait, am I on the same website, or did I suddenly go somewhere else? Okay. Because it's inconsistent. So consistency allows you to help the reader, or it helps the reader understand where they are in that document, and it helps them know that they're in the same document and kind of trust that information. Okay. Now, you can signal changes in the information by using elements of consistency. In other words, if you could make the body font, the smallest font or the font of the content itself of a document, say all Times New Roman, and make it consistent. But then you can make subheadings Arial or some other type of font. Well, that creates inconsistency. So I know as I'm reading the Times New Roman, when I get to a piece that's Arial, I will eventually learn, I'll figure it out fairly quickly, that means you are signaling, you as the designer are signaling that now we're going on to a different topic, or it's a different section or something like that. Okay, so that's what consistency allows us to do. But you need to make sure that elements throughout a document are consistent. One thing that I always get my students on is they like to copy and paste. People like to copy and paste their references in the reference section. Well, if you copy and paste without changing the font, what it's usually doing is picking up the formatting of the place that you're copying it and pasting it from. And so I'll get to the end of a document for one of my students, and suddenly their works cited page or the references section will be completely inconsistent, and none of it will match the font that they use throughout the document. And I know they copy and pasted it, but they'll typically I'll lower the grade because of it, right? So consistency, make sure that everything's consistent. That includes font size, font color, font type, and so forth. So every element on every page should be exactly the same. If you notice these 3 pages, you'll notice the section heading at the very top. They're all the exact same font. They're all the exact same size, all exact same color, and notice that they're also all aligned exactly alike. And below that, you have subheadings or sub-subheadings in some case. The paragraphs are in a certain position throughout. Even the graphics are placed in the same way. They're centered with enough room around them. They don't have a black square around them. The figure labels are in the same place, and so forth. So it's consistent throughout the document. The footer of the document is exactly the same, and so forth. Okay, so make sure that every element throughout your document is the same. After you finish a document, go back through and just start looking at it with a fine-tooth comb. Is even one word off? Is even one word for some reason a different font or a different color? It happens sometimes. I don't know why. I was working on a paper not too long ago where the second paragraph looked really odd for some reason, and I just kind of ignored it, and I went back to it, and I just kept looking at it, and it was like it wasn't quite black. And so I highlighted it, and I went to my text color, and sure enough, it was like this really, really dark gray for some reason, and I had to turn it black. So be really careful. Look at those things, and if something seems out of place, double check it and make sure that it's correct. Okay. Some of the things again to look for: headings and footers, page numbers. Make sure the page numbers are in the same place on every page. Also, obviously, font size, font type. So titles, subtitles, make sure they're all the same font type, font size. Figure headings, table headings, make sure they're in the same place. Also, make sure that the spacing throughout the document is the same. So that includes line space, and then the space between paragraphs, the space between images, the space between a figure heading and the image itself. These are all things that you have to be aware of. So absolutely every element needs to be checked, and you need to make sure that they're all consistent throughout. The next one is contrast. Contrast focuses a reader's attention on objects, it signals levels of information, and frames objects on the page. Now, what do I mean by contrast in the first place? Contrast basically just means that things stand out against other things, somehow. There are a lot of ways to make things stand out, and I'll tell you those in a minute. But here's an example of a lot of uses of contrast. So contrast, for example, the title of this page is bolded, whereas the rest are not bolded. Actually, I think all the subtitles are bolded. That creates contrast on the page. It's darker against anything else, and so it stands out. Another use of contrast is the font type. You'll notice that it's hard to see in this image, and I apologize, but the body of this image is in something like Garamond or Times New Roman or something that has a serif on it. And if you don't know what a serif is, go look at my font lecture, and if you want in one of my classes, you'll be looking at that soon anyway. But basically, the body font is some type of serif font, like a Times New Roman. whereas the titles are all sans serif. They don't have those little serifs. So this is like an Arial or Helvetica or something like that. So we've got a couple of things going on that creates contrast. So far we have that one is bolded, the other is not. One has Arial font, the other has Times New Roman. Another method of contrast here is the size. You'll notice that the headings are a larger size than the body font. The body font is usually about 12 point, whereas the headings are anywhere up to 16 or 18 point font. So a larger size creates contrast. Now the last thing that creates contrast is something we call white space. Notice how much space there is between DataMagic 2000 at a glance and the next subheading below it, DataMagic 2000 basic structure. There are probably about 2 double spaces there. That creates contrast as well because it frames that top title. That DataMagic 2000 at a glance is now framed. The paragraphs likewise have white space around them, so they're framed and they're easy to see. It's easy to see where a paragraph begins and ends. Now notice the paragraph below, above, DataMagic 2000 does not interfere with normal business operations. Okay, so notice the paragraph above that title. Notice that paragraph there's more spaces between that paragraph and the following subsection than there is between the paragraphs themselves. There's like a double space between paragraphs and then probably 4 spaces between that and the title. So that additional space, not only does it follow the principle of grouping, so we're grouping like items with less space between them, but it also creates contrast. That extra white space around it creates contrast, right? So these are all elements that you can use when you're trying to achieve contrast. As I said, white space creates contrast. You can use it to frame elements. So figures, text, pages, paragraphs, anything, titles, you can use more or less white space to frame documents and create contrast. Text size and type creates contrast as well. As I mentioned, a larger font size or text size against a smaller one makes that larger one stand out. All right. Now I'm going to give you a kind of a rule of thumb. You'll want to use about 12-point font as the smallest font you use in a document. So any document you use, the body itself should be 12-point font. Well, you're going to have headings and subheadings in that document. You'll want to increase those by 2 points as you move up. So if you only have one level of heading in the entire document, that should be at about 14-point font, and then your body document should be about 12-point font. Now let's say you have 2 levels of heading. So you have a heading and then you have a subheading. Well, that main heading then should be 16-point font, and the subheading should be 14-point font, and then your body font should say 12-point font. Now the only time, please take note of this if you're in one of my classes, the only time that you should use fonts smaller than 12-point font is when you use figure or table headings. And those are typically around 10-point font, okay? But it's a little bit too small to read if there's a lot of font that's 12-point font. I'm sorry, 10-point font. But 12-point font is about the right size to use. So otherwise use 12-point font in your bodies. Also use serif and sans serif fonts appropriately. And I just mentioned those. And again, you can look at a different lecture that talks about font. And utilize bolding and italicizing. Those create contrast really well. Underlining doesn't create contrast very well, and I wouldn't use that very much at all if I could avoid it. But bolding and italicizing creates contrast. Let me say something about all of this. Okay, the whole reason contrast works is because it's used sparingly. All right. So in other words, if we see a bold word in a paragraph, our eye is drawn to that bold word because it creates contrast. And we want to draw attention to something that's really important, maybe a note or a warning or something like that. But if that entire paragraph was bolded, the effect would be lost, right? And the same goes for italicizing, the same goes for using all caps. All caps could be used to create contrast as well. You could use all caps for titles or headings or subheadings. But again, if you use it all, if you have an entire paragraph of all caps, not only does it eliminate the whole point of contrast, it also makes it very difficult to read, okay? So make sure that you use these things sparingly. Now, color also creates contrast. Now, for business documents, I say black and white, black font on white paper is typically the best run. I've had students that try to use maybe red on white or something like that just to create, they think it'll stand out. oftentimes it might not look professional though, and unless you're a graphic designer that understands how to use colors adequately, you might actually be ruining the contrast. It might not draw any attention to it at all. So use just the basics of black font on white paper when you design your documents. That's probably the best. That's the end of the slideshow. Hope you enjoyed it, learned something from it. If you're in one of my classes and you have a question, feel free and send me a comment, or send me an email rather. If you are not in one of my classes and you have any comments or you have any questions, feel free and post them below and I'll get to them just as soon as I can. Again, this is Dr. Clint Lanier, Professor of Rhetoric and Professional Communication. Thank you.